in the end, try and have an outlet for however it is you're feeling or whatever it is you're thinking. And there's no like pressure on that, is there? It's just about taking it in your own stead.
My guests today need no introduction if you're a fan of Race Across the World. If you haven't watched it, you're missing a huge treat. Since finishing the race, the brother and sister duo who made viewers emotional with their bond and their self-disclosure on the show have been high profile. And now Betty and James Mukherjee are here to talk to me about what it was like for each of them to grow up with Betty's medical diagnosis of MRKH, which I will let Betty explain. With 5 years between them, you might expect that there'd be some bickering as they spent more than 50 days together, 24/7, in some really tough situations on the show. But they genuinely looked like they were the best of friends throughout every single episode. I'm constantly asked how I cope with sibling rivalry with teenagers, and although my kids do get on pretty well, there are always moments. So I'm going to ask these two what their secret is. Betty and James, welcome to Teenage Kicks.
Hi, thanks.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Oh, look, I get emotional thinking about you two all the time when when I was preparing this today. I was just casting back to some of those episodes, and not just for that key moment where the whole of the UK got emotional watching you two, which we'll talk about in a minute, but because you just have such a nice bond. Now I watch with my son, and he was kind of rolling his eyes in the corner of the sofa every time I go, oh. Did you know that was the sort of impact you were having on people?
Not at all, really. And do you know what? We never actually expected to have that bond ourselves. So I think the fact that has then rippled and like affected other people back home is just like unimaginable. Like you say, as brother and sister, as sibling relationships, you do expect that kind of bicker. And I don't know, we didn't have that, did we, James? We kind of developed this like telepathic communication of don't push me right now, or I'm hungry and just leave me alone. But yeah, we never actually had an argument. So
it was one of the more surprising things, and I think mum and dad were more worried about that happening, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, surprisingly, we sort of got on pretty well most of the time. But as Betty says, yeah, we had that communication method of just giving each other a look.
Right. Yeah. So would you have had like normal bickers like most brothers and sisters do before at home?
Yeah, all the time. Like growing up, we'd like, argue all the time. Obviously with our older brother as well, Matt. So me and him would sort of not gang up on Betty, but I sort of intruded on sort of their early sort of friendship and relationship, I guess. So yeah, I was the sidekick of Matt, really.
Right. Because how old is Matt?
He's a year and a half older than me.
Right. So were you two pretty close when you were growing up?
Yeah. So me and Matt were really close growing up. And then when James came along, he just ruined it. And then it was like boys versus me. And I just got labelled with middle child syndrome.
Oh, no. Oh, we could have a whole episode on that.
So at home we always used to bicker and used to fight and fall out over things. So we fully expected on the race to do that. But yeah, we surprised everyone.
So it was your idea, Betty, that both of you should go on Race Across the World?
It was.
And you knew that you might bicker. Did you have any contingency plans for how you were going to manage that?
I think the thing is, James and I obviously knew each other as children growing up. But quite quickly, like with James's cricket and him being out every weekend, and, you know, as you grow into adults, like we just never spent that time together. So actually, you know, and I'd recently moved out of the family home. So we hadn't argued for a long time, I would say. But yeah, I just knew that we didn't know each other as adults. And that was definitely something that I thought a lot of people don't get the chance to do.
Yeah.
If we were given that opportunity, it would be a nice thing to take. But yeah, I didn't know that we weren't going to bicker. It was just one of those risks.
I remember, because watching it right from the beginning, I remember the intros to you two, and you were sort of saying, well, James would rather just go living it large on Ibiza or similar. And and probably isn't much of a traveller. How were you feeling at that point before it all kicked off, before you really got into the travelling, James?
It was tough because we didn't know what to expect. And I was just so like, oh, this is kind of a cool experience. Let's go see some new countries. But the element of it being unknown was so massive that it was just like, right, I want to get my hands dirty. I want to get stuck into this. I want to get involved and everything. And I think we quickly realised it was going to be harder than it actually made out to be. We signed up because we said, yeah, we could do this. Like, it looks pretty easy. But that first night, that first day when we were struggling to even know what to do, it was so tough. And yeah, we managed to find our way through it, thankfully.
In a sense, though, because I went with that previous kind of traveling experience, I suppose, and I was definitely bigged up to be this like more experienced traveler.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt the pressure like straight away. And when actually James probably thrived more than I did, I was like, what is going on here? He's used to having just like beers with the lads, and yet he's loving it. And I was just, definitely feeling the pressure of signing us up for it, bringing my little brother with me, not really know what was going on. But it was just a situation that you could not ever have prepared yourself for. I think you could genuinely be the most experienced traveller in the world and find it tricky.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, some of what you did was super tricky. I mean, I've done some fairly offbeat travelling many, many, many years ago. And I do look at that and I start to get quite panicky watching the show sometimes. And I have to kind of talk myself down and go, this is not you, Helen, doing this. It's them who's like sweating rivers or sleeping on dirt floors. It's not you. Don't have to do this. Do you have a particularly low moment? I'll start with you, James. Was there any moment that really you struggled to get your head? I mean, you didn't look like you struggled to get your head around anything, but was there something?
I mean, just touching on your first point of feeling like you're going through it, but you're not. I still think about things we did now. And my heart starts racing a little bit. I'm like,
okay.
Oh my God, do I have to do that again? Like, oh no, I don't. I was done. That's fine. Looks like some things proper nerve-wracking. So it's not just you. You're not alone, I promise. Low moments. I think losing the passport was obviously quite a big thing. Quite a low point. Losing the money belt for me was quite a low point. They're the ones that stand out really. And I guess we always said, didn't we, like the positives outweighed the negatives all the time.
Yeah.
So to think of many negatives, you have to sort of just think of the positives that go with it. So it's quite hard to think of like lots of negatives really.
So what was the positive that went with losing the money belt?
Well, it kind of spurred us on, didn't it? I think from that night and what we experienced from that night was just like get up and go attitude from it.
Yeah.
We sort of got on with the night ahead. Like we planned well. We just sort of put everything that had happened behind us and just went with it. And I think that was a really positive thing, because if that hadn't happened, we might have just stayed a bit laboured, stayed a bit like not really too bothered. And it sort of just kicked us on and spurred us on to do better. So
right, yeah, because I was watching that. In fact, I'm aware of a little bit of a sense of dread in my stomach right now thinking about it. And because you were like more 24 hours not knowing where this money belt was and whether or not you get kicked out of the race. I'm making 24 hours up, but it felt like a really long time. Something like that I would have wanted to know instantly, and I'd have been pacing the floor demanding that someone sort it out right there and then. And you two, including you, Betty, you were just like, I mean, I could tell you were a bit stressed, but you were just quite chilled, like as if you accepted, oh, okay, so there's nothing more we can do until the next thing happened.
I think obviously it is a TV show where days are condensed into seconds, sometimes minutes on the show, and you'd probably be right in saying that it was like a good 24 hours where I think it's safe to say, like, James, I didn't speak to you, did I, for a good maybe 14, 15, 16 hours. I'd just literally into shutdown mode. So when we talk about like the lowest point, that was definitely my lowest point, sort of losing. And it was more because of like, I was feeling like guilt and like if we got sent home, it would be my fault. And even now to this day, I just think I would never have been able to like live that down or kind of cope with that. So I definitely went into like shutdown mode and didn't want to speak to anyone. And I think because I felt out of control and that I couldn't do anything, I didn't have my phone, I couldn't ring the station myself, I couldn't, you know, I didn't even know where that bus station was. I couldn't even Google Maps it to go, can I go walk there myself? Or I just had no sense of like control in that instance. So it was really tricky to kind of navigate. And the agreement of staying over at that homestay was that we went out fishing at like 4 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You went to work and you still didn't know if you were going to be able to continue.
And then after that, it was like, you know, James loved that fishing trip and was like, look at the sunrise and taking it all in. I literally just sat with my head in my hands thinking this is the worst thing in the world. And then I was like kicking myself because I was like, if I go home right now, I've spent the last 24 hours just hating it. Whereas James could go home and go, oh, well, the last 24 hours was great because I still made the most of it. And, you know, that was kind of like a pivotal moment for me just to kind of like make the most out of like whatever opportunity or experience you find yourself in.
It's kind of like live in the moment. I'm just wondering whether there was any, well, I'm imagining that for me in that situation, I would have had to have given up the need to control. And we might talk about that because I know you've talked about having to control. Yeah. And I'm I'll label myself a control freak actually, because I do it because I do it when I don't feel safe. Yeah. And I think that's pretty standard, that we only control what we're frightened of, and what we're worried about. And in that situation, I'm just wondering what it was like to have no control. And was there like did a switch flip for you at some point to get to that place of, okay, well, I need to change my approach here?
Yeah, I mean, I remember sort of the morning after the fishing, and I just sat by like the water. It must have been for at least 2-3 hours. James kind of had lunch and cooked with the family and made the most of that experience, but I just had to be on my own. And kind of during that time, I just thought that exactly that. Like if I go home right now, if they tell me, right, you're going home, I wouldn't have done anything to help that situation. So I think the first thing I did was ask the guy that we were staying with if I could ring the bus station on his phone. Because then at least I knew I'd asked a question and tried. And then, it kind of just spiraled into a positive. It all just happened. And then we were back at the bus station and
having a hug with that guy that And James, what were you feeling when all this was going on, when Betty had sort of taken herself off and isolated herself from you? What were you feeling about it all?
I think I was sleeping for a couple of hours, actually.
Okay.
There's one scene where I'm on the sofa just asleep. So
just make the most of the downtime.
Yeah, really. But I think it's quite, there wasn't really much we could do.
No.
Because we'd asked the people to ring the bus station. We checked everywhere we thought it might be. We knew it was in the bus station. We couldn't get there because there was no one there to take us. There was no car. Like, we were just stuck, basically. And we had our hopes in the hands of other people.
Yeah.
In the strangers who had been there for 10, 12 hours at a time.
Yeah.
So, in my head, there was nothing else we could do. We'd done all we could.
Yeah.
And we now just, I don't know, could I just enjoy a little bit? Like, I was hungry for a start. So we ate some lunch and cooked. I think it was just trying to be thankful at the same time for those people who had actually taken us in, because if we could have been in the middle of nowhere, we could have been on the side of the street in the pouring rain. We could have been, nowhere at that time, and we could have been stranded. So for those people who did take us in and were letting us work, letting us stay on their floor, letting us, have that quality time, was trying to give something back, I guess.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I guess we could go into a whole thing about gratitude and how useful that is as a strategy when we're feeling pretty rough.
Yeah.
That actually works. And you said it changed how you felt, Betty, once you'd come to terms with it and accepted that.
Yeah, I think it was a good life lesson to have, really. And because at the end of the day, like, all the worries that I had were hypothetical, like they hadn't come true. Like, I wasn't going home. And, I was just getting myself in such a state of like, what if this happens, or what if this happens? And instead of just kind of enjoying it for what it is. And, like being on that show, Race Across the World, and where we were and what we were experiencing is like once in a lifetime. And yet I was just stuck in my own head going, oh, I could be going home. So it was just a bit of like kick up the bum that I needed to be like, just, live in the moment a bit more, appreciate things for what they are and deal with things as they come instead of just in it out in your own head.
Well, there's that stat, isn't there? It's like 81% of what we worry about never comes through. Yeah. So what's the point?
Exactly. But I think the thing is, I worked in mental health and worked with children for 5 years in the NHS, and I would tell kids that on a daily basis. But trying to tell yourself that in a moment, it is difficult. So it's not about like invalidating anyone who worries or anything like that. It is just, it's tricky to navigate. But I think if you can reflect and see how you would do things differently, then that's always a positive for next.
Yeah, definitely. And it's completely understandable. The fear just takes over, doesn't it? So then you've got to kind of employ some strategies to mitigate it a bit.
I think with all the other factors involved as well, that we were, the environment we were in, you couldn't just call up your mum or boyfriend or whoever it was. You couldn't just, how easy it is now to message someone or something. Like, we'd probably tired, we hadn't had much sleep, probably hungry, So all the other factors as well just built up to this then explosion of emotion and feeling like a bit down in the dump and whatnot. So
things like it was so hot, but you couldn't even go like shower because they just had like a bucket of water.
Yeah.
And it's like you couldn't even just go sit in the shower, feel the water, and then be like, right, I'm refreshed. Like filming in, you were tired, and like everything felt worse than it probably was.
Yeah, no, that really is getting back to basics of just all you've got is yourself.
Yeah.
So, Betty, the real famous moment was when you started talking to James about your diagnosis of, and I'm going back to my notes because I can't remember the acronym order, MRKH. Is that right?
Yeah.
And because I read something you said on Twitter recently about like of all the people that answered a survey about it that you posted, something like only 6% had heard of it, and I'd never heard of it. So can you just explain a little bit for us what MRKH is?
Yeah, so it's a rare condition which affects kind of the women's reproductive system. So there's two types. There's type 1 that just affects kind of the development of the uterus, and then there's type 2 which can cause sort of other issues as well, such as affecting like the kidneys, heart defects, spinal defects, hearing.
Oh, right.
I have type 2, so I only have one kidney. But touch wood, everything else seems to be okay. But it is funny thinking back because when I was about 4 or 5, I had to get my hearing tested because I was just a really loud kid. I just used to shout all the time. So my mum thought I had something wrong with my hearing. Turns out I didn't, but maybe I do after all.
And you just wouldn't know unless you had symptoms that there was anything wrong.
Yeah. So I didn't have any particular symptoms. I just didn't start my period.
Yeah.
That was when the investigation started, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. But it's clearly more than just an anatomical, an organ's missing. It's not that straightforward if it affects your hearing and other things as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that survey that you referred to, there was about 13,000 people that sort of voted on this survey between Twitter and Instagram. And only 7% had ever heard of it.
Yeah.
So, I went to GPs quite a few times and they never sort of investigated it or even thought to consider it. And even now, if I go to the GP, like it must be in my notes somewhere that I have this condition. And, I've been recently and people have asked have you taken a pregnancy test? Well,
oh my God.
And that's the GPs and doctors. So it's just so like not known about.
Well, it's only the experts that know about anything, isn't it? My daughter has type 1 diabetes, and if she ever goes to the GP, she's always asked the most ridiculous questions about it. And you'd imagine a GP, diabetes, it's not that uncommon. But the only people that get it, that really understand, are the consultants that she sees every 3 months.
Exactly. All the people experiencing it, and that's
Well, yeah, exactly. And actually, they understand it better than the consultants. Have you had that kind of? Well, you said that you've not really had anyone to talk to about it. You've not met anyone else with the condition in all the time that you had it.
Yeah, I mean, I was admittedly, I have probably been in a lot of denial about my condition, and never really accessed things like support groups or anything like that. But I do know now, since talking about it, that there are amazing support groups out there, and I would kind of recommend them for anyone to access. But I do think sometimes when you're dealing with something like this, you do just need to muddle through on your own sometimes. But that's not, it's obviously important to talk about it, but you do think, well, no one else understands, no one else gets it. And no one else in like your smaller circle gets it.
No, and that is the reality, isn't it? No one that hasn't got it gets it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to share those support groups if you're willing to, that I can share in my show notes a bit later on. I'll come back to how it felt for you to be diagnosed. But James, what do you remember of Betty's diagnosis? Anything?
So I was 12 at the time. I think we'd been at a school production, if I'm right. I think Betty might have been performing in it, and we'd got home. It was quite late, and it might have been the next day that I just heard Mum and Dad speaking to her about it. Didn't know much about it really. I was 12 at the time. I had my own young teenage stuff going on, so I didn't really take much notice of it. But then it sort of just came. I found out a few years later, maybe 15, 16, 17, found out, and again, didn't really take much notice of it because I didn't really think it was, my business, if you like.
Right.
And I guess now with support and how it's sort of come out, it's more in such a natural way, and the support that Betty's got from it actually shows it is quite a subject that needs to be talked about. If that makes sense. But at the time, I had, no real influence on it. I had no idea really what it was, what it meant. Because, why would you at that sort of age? Like, I was 12, I was just starting sort of secondary school, had my own stuff going on. And, it's girls at that time were, relevant, really.
Well, and the whole business of having a family, that's all completely irrelevant when you're that age.
Oh, yeah, 100%. You don't care about no one else at that age.
No, true. No. So did it feel, and I don't want to, this sounds a bit blunt, but did it feel like it just wasn't that much of a big deal? Yeah,
because they never really talked about it. It was never talked about to me except when I heard it that one time.
Yeah.
And then you sort of pick up Mum and Dad speaking about things, and it's like, oh, why are you talking about that? What does that mean? Like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
But as I say, it wasn't until a few years later. So yeah, it wasn't really anything to me at the time.
And I think as you're 12, like, yes, you were 12, but you were also my 12-year-old brother. And, it's not like you were my sister and you were about to start your period and then we could have that conversation. Like, anything that I was going through, like, even if, a normal brother and sister relationship, you don't have those in-depth conversations, do you, about relationships or what your body's doing or anything like that. So, yeah, and I genuinely believe that if we hadn't been on Race Across the World, that we wouldn't have sat down and had that conversation, because why would you? He's still my little brother in my eyes. Like, why would I sit him down that conversation?
And Betty, did you kind of always know that you might talk to James about this while you were there, or did it just kind of come out?
I think I knew that conversation was going to happen, because obviously it's such a big part of who I am and why I do certain things or why I act in a certain way. And, when you've spent 8 weeks 24/7 with someone, you're going to start learning a bit more about each other, like no matter who you are or what relationship you have with them.
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly how it was going to come out or why it was going to come out or whatever, but I did have a little bit of an inkling that if I was going to speak about it, then obviously it would be with James. I think, like James said, how you saw that conversation would be how it would be wherever it, would have been in the world, if we'd been at home, whatever, that conversation would have been like that. And I genuinely believe that, because, it wasn't produced. We were kind of just left to have that conversation. And everything we kind of said was just raw and real. And yeah.
Yeah, and you could see that completely. So yeah, I was in floods, and then I was on my phone going, I need to talk to her about this, because I assumed that having said it in such a public place, you might want to use that platform to talk about it more. And you've talked since about how you want to raise awareness, because as you've said, if just one person doesn't have to feel the way you felt when you had your diagnosis, then that's worth doing.
Yeah. And it's pretty wild to think about, because in the 10 years that I've been diagnosed, I've barely spoke about it, like making a new friend or whatever. Like I've just kind of kept it to myself. So why I chose to share that with 7-8 million people in one day, I'm not sure. But here we are.
Well, the time just was right. Clearly, I have this kind of conversation with my daughter all the time, because and I think most people that have got something different than the norm will keep it to themselves, because especially as teenagers. I mean, did you feel this? I'm asking two questions in one here, but for either of you, but you especially, Betty, I guess. Did you feel like you just didn't want to have people think of you differently? Is that why you kept it to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a teenager anyway, you're always seeking to just fit in with your peers, aren't you? So
yeah,
no matter what anyone's going through, if you then add an extra layer of complication, it was definitely easier at that time to just kind of try and forget about it. And I remember my first ever doctor's appointment with the specialist, and he kind of just said to me, you're not thinking about having children yet, so it doesn't matter. And obviously at 16, I was like, well, yeah, obviously I'm not thinking about that. But when we think about womb or uterus, you think about having a family, don't you, baby?
Yeah.
But obviously as a teenage girl, there's a lot more complications that come first before that. And that was never spoken about. So it was easy for me about to sit my GCSEs to just kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
I was asked to find a picture the other day for a newspaper around that time. And I was looking back for some pictures, and I was like, I just look so like normal and happy. And I knew I would probably be faking it. I would have been feeling in pain at the time, probably emotionally. Yeah. But yeah, you wouldn't be able, I was looking back at my prom pictures, and that was 3 months after I'd been diagnosed, and I just looked so normal.
How were you feeling, if you're able to reflect on that now?
I think I was just feeling very confused and very lost and quite isolated. And looking back now, I know that I did a lot of that to myself. Whether that have been in like a self-sabotage way of like, well, I'm different and I deserve to be on my own, or whether it was just because I just want to try and forget about that, so I'm not going to associate myself with support groups and things like that.
You say you deserve to be on your own. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but is that what was going through your head, that because you're not going to have children in the normal way, you can't be with anyone else?
I definitely felt like no one would want to be with me if I didn't have children. I think because I had in my head that I wanted to be a mom and I wanted to have a family, and I just thought like if I wasn't going to have that, like why would anyone want to be with me?
It's like game over for a part of your life. That's huge to be dealing with at 16.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And James, now that you've had that moment on the show with Betty, can you see how deep that feels? Sorry, that sounds like a really trick question, like I'm trying to trip you up. Like, no.
That's all right.
But did it change? I suppose what I'm asking is, did it change your perception of your sister?
I mean, she'll always be my older sister. Like, she'll always be that annoying older sister, won't she? Like, it's not going to change it. I always described, like, I guess I got to that age of 16, 17 when I found out what it actually meant, and sort of described her as, being brave, resilient, whatever. So it sort of just hammered that home, really, because, not only the condition conversation happening, but to do that in a scenario that we're in, on the trip of a lifetime, but under like immense circumstances and the environment we're in and things, it just sort of enhanced that. But it as Betty said, it's such a natural thing to happen, and I think to open up like that on such a natural but such a deep level was was incredible. And as you know, she's never spoke about it for the last 10 years, but to do it in front of 7-8 million people on a national TV show is quite amazing.
It is, and it was a hugely emotional moment, and she kind of did it to you as well, because you lost it briefly.
Yeah. It was just sort of raw at the time, and you know, as I say, the environment might have had a part to play in that, but you know, it was just how I felt. And I think one of the moments we've seen that's blown up is the cameraman piece where he steps in and gives me a hug, which was nice. So we'll always be thankful for him, and you know, the team we had behind us were amazing as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we live in the West, and we're all so avoidant of our feelings as a general population, and I work to try and not be, and to help other people not be as a counsellor. It was a real moment for me, because I can, you know, the women that I see who are able to open up and cry and be okay with it are, you know, there's quite a lot of them. We all try and lock it down, but women generally, and I am stereotyping, but it's what I see. Whereas there's a huge thing about men keeping it together and not. And when I said you lost it, I didn't want that to sound like, oh my God, you lost it, because I think losing it.
Then anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Well, losing it is so important, and I mean, do you feel like that might have been a cathartic thing for more than just you, the people that are watching it?
100%. I saw that from sort of reactions from it. The amount of men who have messaged on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is and been like thank you for. It might not mean anything. They might not change who they are, and they might not go and show that emotion. But to know that it's like done something in that they can feel to message is even something.
Yeah, it is.
Because you might not have to show any emotion to anyone, but even messaging someone and saying something nice or having a laugh with someone can change someone's day. It can help them from stopping them from doing something they, you know, might regret going forward. So that to me was massive, and to me it's a thank you for their support. It didn't really mean anything on a deeper level, but now I've reflected on the last, when did the show end? Month and a half ago? 2 months?
Yeah.
You know, it actually means a lot more than that. So yeah, like if you can help anyone, and even just a smile in the street or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, can make a difference. And they've seen a man cry now on national TV, and nothing, you know, nothing broke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Betty, I'm going to go back to my notes because I wrote some questions. Because there are things. Oh, you said, you've kind of alluded to this already, but you said that having the condition gave you a mindset of being negative and not really liking yourself. And you talked about being in denial. I did not see negativity on that show. Were you just masking?
Well, it's hilarious because the amount of messages that we read being like, Betty's the most positive person in the world. My mum was like, are you joking? And I was like, oh my God. And even, you know, the 2 episodes that I knew I was less positive, like with the bum bag situation and obviously disclosing my condition, like even after that, everyone was like, she's just the most bubbliest, happiest person. And I was like, what are you seeing? But, and even James was like shaking his head. I think obviously the show is a lovely family-friendly show. They want to put you out to be the best person you are. And obviously I'm very grateful for that. There were obviously times in the show where it was like highly stressful or whatever, and that was kind of just a given, but I would never describe myself as like a positive person. I'm always a glass half empty kind of girl, always kind of preparing for the worst or expecting the worst. And yeah, it's definitely made me think of myself differently because I'm like, I don't know why I'm like that. And it's actually made the last 10 years just really difficult, and it didn't need to be as difficult. But I think when, you know, even pre-diagnosis, I was kind of under the impression that something was different or a bit abnormal. And when you start to develop that kind of negative self-talk at such a young age, that can be really, really damaging. And I've definitely felt the effects of that, because if anything was to go like slightly wrong, I would quickly spiral into like worst case scenario. And that's in anything. If it's work, friendship, losing your passport, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
I would always go quite quickly to worst case scenario, this is my fault, this is what I deserve.
I'm not going to ask you if you get a sense of where that came from, because I ask people that sort of thing on the podcast all the time, and we could be here much longer than we planned to be. But I'm genuinely interested in that sort of question, because I'm exactly the same. I do exactly the same, and I have to work really quite hard to catch myself doing it. And I think that's all you can do, is just catch yourself doing it and correct it. And over time, it gets easier, and you're more likely to go to the oh, but what if a positive thing happened, than the oh, but this is definitely going to happen. What I am going to ask you is if you've got any advice that you would give to any young person who suddenly finds that their perception of their life is completely altered in the way that I'm assuming yours was.
I think, even though I didn't kind of reach out to those like specific support groups or those specialists, I think on reflection, like speaking to like the friends that I've still got now, and like mum and dad, for example, definitely helped, because even though I knew they didn't understand, it was like, it wasn't keeping it all in, it was giving that kind of outlet to get a little bit of that out. So I think just, and I know it's not possible for everyone to talk. And even as a 26-year-old grown woman now, I go into moments of shutdown where I can't speak to people and I can't articulate how I'm feeling, but just finding that outlet, like whatever it is, it might be music, it might be writing things down, it might be, journaling, walking, whatever. Anything that just allows you to get to that level where you can go, right, I can now speak about it. And I'll still have periods now where it's like a couple of days, and then suddenly I'll be like, la, 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 this is what I was feeling, this is what I was thinking, and this is what I should have done, but I didn't. And maybe next time I'll do this. And I'm sure it is frustrating for the people around me, but I do feel like I am getting better at that. So I think it's just finding that outlet, whatever works for you. It's not going to be the same for everyone. And that's what makes it tricky, isn't it? Because you can't just apply what your best friend's doing, and you can't apply what your teacher says to you or whatever. It is just about figuring out what makes you tick and what makes you thrive, kind of thing.
Yeah. And you talk about that on your Instagram account, which I'll get you to share as well. And I see that very clearly. And surrounding yourself with people who understand you.
Yeah.
And I think letting people in, because clearly when you went into shutdown mode on the show, James was just getting on with his own thing, because he knew you and he knew what the best way to deal with it was. Is that fair to say?
He was thinking, I'm getting double helpings here. You don't come back.
Double helpings and a kip.
Yeah, exactly.
About time.
But I think I've learned that on the race. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Like situations like that on the race, and obviously the crew that was with us, I just completely shut them out, and that was their experience too. And I think that's kind of some of like that guilt and shame, is like, I'm actually ruining James's experience here if I'm acting the way I'm acting. And
you went down that rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, all the rabbit holes. Yeah.
There was a chat we had on it. I think you said that you dealt with it horrifically. I think I said, yeah, well, I knew you were going to deal with it like that.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to shut down, not speak to anyone. So I wasn't going to sit there and mope around waiting for you to get your ass in gear. I was going to do something about it. So
yeah,
it's knowing that. It's knowing who you've got on, like who's got your back, who's going to be there when you need something, and who you can be there for as well. Like, having a good circle around you. I've never really been that close with mum and dad, like being able to speak to them properly. But in the last 10 months, probably since we got back from the being away, I've had to have a couple of difficult conversations, and moving out of home and relationships and whatnot. So knowing that there's people there that you might not expect, and that's what we found from the race, is that there's someone else there to speak to about whatever. So it's identifying them and keeping them close if possible. But it's also not easy to always speak, as Betty said. Like, people aren't speakers. We're just not. We're not we're not wired to speak about emotions and things. So, but just knowing it's okay, and we're not made of wood. Like, it's okay to feel sad sometimes, and
yeah,
accepting it.
Absolutely. Oh, look, I could talk to you all day, but I need to let you go. Is there anything else either of you want to say, or each of you just share where you'd like people to go or where they can find help as a result of listening to this?
I think I've worked previously with a few work colleagues and friends and stuff with, especially for men's mental health, Andy's Man's Club. It's obviously a massive one, and I've raised some money before for them doing walks or whatever. So yeah, that's always a good start for men's mental health, especially.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And yeah, I think just my piece of advice is kind of try not to keep it locked in for too long. And like I say, everyone deals with things differently, and sometimes people need different time to process things. But in the end, try and have an outlet for however it is you're feeling or whatever it is you're thinking. And there's no like pressure on that, is there? It's just about taking it in your own stead. I think for people, I'd love for any woman to join my community of It's a Balance thing. It's a new brand that I'm trying to set up, and it is just about allowing that space for women to feel like they belong somewhere.
Yeah, we didn't. I didn't ask you any specific questions about it, but I was following it for a little while. So tell us a little bit about that.
No, it's just as a 16-year-old girl and growing up in the last kind of 10 years, I've felt at times like I don't fit in anywhere or I don't belong anywhere. And
yeah,
I just thought, coming off the back of this, if I could provide that space for anyone out there, then I want to do that. So it kind of sits within the health and wellbeing realm, being a PT and previous mental health practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping that it's going to develop into different things like wellness days or a series of what they don't teach you at school. So whether it's doing taxes or how to dress yourself, how to do your makeup, whatever it is, just everything to do with being a woman and just feeling like you belong somewhere.
Yeah, can you include in that, you say how to do your taxes, the other big one is how to vote and why it's important, something about politics, because no one knows any of these basic kind of getting through life skills, so we just avoid them.
Exactly, and that's the thing, these life skills that are just not taught at school.
Yeah.
Then suddenly you just feel like you're muddling through the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's a brilliant idea. I'll put the link for that in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you'd like me to link to, any of your socials, either of you, or any of the support groups for MRKH that you mentioned? MKH?
Yeah, I've been talking recently to MRKH Connect, which is one of the leading MRKH charities, and I'm hoping to do a bit of work with them or just see what they're all about, because I've denied myself of it for the last 10 years, so I owe myself a bit of support from them, I think. And then my socials, Betty Muck _ I'm trying to be as real and honest on there and just, not just show up at the best of times and the highlights, which Instagram tends to be, but also some of the more rubbish times as well. Just we are real.
You do it well. James, anything from you?
As I say, Andy's Man's Club is always a good place to start. My Instagram is James Mukherjee 1, which is difficult to spell, so writing might be easier. Again, I don't post too much on there, but my messages are always open if anyone does need to chat. I've had a few people just message and say, I'm dealing with it, I've got this and whatnot. So
amazing.
Even a conversation can cheer anyone up. So
yeah, amazing. Thank you both so much for talking to me today.
Yes. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you too to everyone who's already rated and reviewed the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Amazon, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. It really helps get the word out, as well as making me very happy to read what you have to say. If this episode strikes a chord for you, please share it with anyone else you know who might be in the same boat, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you have a story or a suggestion for something you'd like to see covered on the podcast, you can email me at teenagekickspodcast@gmail.com or message me on Instagram. I am Helen Wills. I love hearing from all my listeners. It really makes a difference to me on this journey. See you next week when I'll be chatting to another brilliant guest about the highs and lows of parenting teens. Bye for now.